Hey, Luminary. Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with David Bedrick, author of The Unshaming Way, a compassionate guide to dismantling shame. David is not only an author, but he's a teacher, a counselor, and attorney whose work is deeply rooted in understanding and healing shame. His journey began in a family marked by violence. His father's brutality was overt, while his mother's denial and gaslighting carried a more covert kind of power. This early exposure to shame and its origin shaped his life's work, helping people unshame themselves and others with compassion. Now, I followed David's work for years, drawn to his depth of wisdom, but his impact became really personal when I found myself in a moment of uncertainty after unintentionally hurting a client. I instinctively reached out to David for guidance, and not only did he respond, but he offered me a perspective that shifted everything, helping me acknowledge both my client's experience and my own in a way that honored healing over defensiveness. As leaders, healers, and changemakers, we are always in relationship with others. Whether we realize it or not, we navigate power dynamics, privilege, and unspoken weight of shame, both our own and others. If we aren't aware of how shame operates, we can unintentionally cause harm, even when we have the best intentions.
Mm.
David's work offers us a compassionate roadmap for recognizing, dismantling shame so we can witness without wounding. In today's conversation, I hope we're going to explore how David's astrology and his Chiron story connect to his work around unshaming, why shame is such a powerful force in leadership, healing, and social change, and how
Mm.
we can use the tools of unshaming in our work. And perhaps most importantly, how we can begin to recognize and unshame our deepest longings. Because as
Mm.
David writes in his book, The Unshaming Way, true hunger can only be fed when we unshame it and find a direct path to its conscious fulfillment.
Mm.
Let's dive in. If you're a subscriber, welcome back and thank you for joining me again. And if you're new here, welcome to Star Powered. I'm Leslie Tagorda, your host, a multiracial, multifaceted, professional musician turned web designer turned astrologer. Astrology has helped me overcome an identity crisis by revealing my star powered strengths. Now I use these strengths to guide healers, entrepreneurs, and changemakers like you in making your mark with ease and impact through astrology. If equitable leadership, making your mark, and astrology are also your jam, please subscribe to this channel and share it with an astrology loving bestie. Welcome,
That's beautiful.
David.
I hadn't remembered writing that. I like that. I was thinking, who wrote that?
You did.
Oh, I did. Okay, okay. In that case, no wonder why I liked it.
It's so wonderful. This book is just so profound. I've read it a few times. I've listened to it. Um, how do you feel like compared to like this book compared to all of your other books in terms of favorites or inspiration?
Mhm. I've been wanting to write a book about shame in general. My other books have shame in contexts of psychology as a shaming entity, as gender and body image. But I've been wanting to write a book about shame for 20 plus years. And originally, I had the idea of a book called The Shamed Universe, which was going to be about how shame exists everywhere. And I tried writing that book. I had hundreds of pages, and I couldn't stop editing it. And I realized I can't stop editing it because I don't know enough. I didn't know what I needed to know. I had good ideas, but I hadn't worked with hundreds and thousands of people. I needed to try out the ideas a lot for me to
Yeah.
feel like I understood the idea in an embodied way. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I just love this idea of shame and how you speak about it in the book, how it really has like roots in almost everything we
Yes.
do. And, for a long time, I had a hard time really understanding the shame that just was perpetuated in my upbringing in society.
Yes.
And as I read a social media meme that helped me understand that the difference between shame and guilt was that there's this idea of that shame, there's something wrong with me,
Yes.
versus guilt is I did something wrong.
Yes.
And that changed everything. And I was like, no wonder I've always like filled with shame because I inherently think that there's something wrong with me. And it
Yes.
sounds like that's your story too.
Yes. We live in what I call an allopathic culture. Allopathic means healing focuses on what's wrong with you, and tries to remedy it, right? So if I have a headache, then what did I do to cause that? Did I have too much ice cream? Did I not rest enough? Did I eat wrong foods? Whatever that is. And what can I do to make the headache go away? Everybody thinks that way. I don't sleep enough. How do you sleep more? I did something nasty. How do I not do that? I'm nervous. How do I get over my nervousness? So that orientation towards ourselves is always looking at everything that bugs us about ourselves. What's wrong? How do I fix it? How do I heal it? And that very notion is shaming because it doesn't look at those difficulties as intelligent signals, communications from your system. Maybe my headache is a pounding headache because I haven't said, damn it, I'm upset. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm
Yeah.
dizzy 'cause I'm trying to focus too much and I really need to be disoriented. Maybe anger is getting out of control because I've been suppressing my anger for so damn long. Meaning that what's in the symptom is not to be only relieved, make this go away so I feel better, make me stop doing what I'm doing, eating ice cream at night, doing awful things, putting needles in my arm, whatever that is, before we go to stop those things, and some things need to be stopped. Is there an inherent information and kind of an intelligence built into that experiences? And there always is. But if you say, how do I get rid of it? You'll never find that out.
Yes. What
Mm.
and yes, how do I get rid of it and what's wrong? I know you don't know me very well, but I'm an astrologer. And what I really appreciated about your book is that you put so much like research and clinical language to some of the work that just kind of naturally do that I didn't have
Oh,
words for.
oh,
And when I look at your chart, and I know we have some questions about your chart, which I find
yeah.
super interesting, this part of the unshaming and that internal question, what's wrong with me,
Mhm.
to me is very associated with the Aquarius archetype,
Oh.
because the Aquarius archetype, do you know much about astrology?
I really don't. I've had some people do my chart, but yeah, it's not an area that I know enough very much about. Yeah, but say more. I want to hear.
Yeah. So with astrology, the Aquarius is known as like the rebel maker, the person who's different, the person who's like the outsider looking inside, the someone who doesn't belong or feels like the black sheep. Right.
Mm,
And
mm,
there's part of the Aquarius story, and I'm sure we could find all of the ways that each of the archetypes feel that they don't belong or are different, but
yeah.
that's very much like the description of the Aquarian energy.
Oh.
And what I find super interesting about your chart is that you have Chiron. Chiron is also known as the wounded healer.
Oh.
You might know his mythology in terms of he can't heal in himself what he can heal in others, but you have
Oh.
Chiron in Aquarius
Amazing.
and making this very deep connection to your moon,
Mm,
in a way that if I was giving you a reading, I would say, wow, this feels really, really, really hurtful. That even though you mentioned in your bio that your father was violent, it was almost the gaslighting from your mother that was more hurtful.
yes. It's true in my story and it's true in other people's story. In my story, I have a father. I often say he used fists and belts to express his rage. That's true. So that has a wounding to it, clearly. That's abuse. That's violence. Those
Mhm.
are proper words and can be traumatic when you're a child if it's overwhelmingly powerful, and it was. But then I had a mother who said, that didn't happen. Why you make things up? How come you're so dramatic? Why are you still upset about that? That never would have happened. He never would have done that. Your father loves you. So there's an all-out kind of assault on don't believe your experience.
Mm.
Like a hypnosis. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. It's really you. Nothing's really happening. And if you're vulnerable, many children are, but not only, then
Yeah.
that message goes in. And now I no longer have a story about my father's violence, what I need to do with that, things that live inside of me because of that. How do I relate to him? How do I relate to men? I don't have that story. I have a story of something's wrong with me. Why am I such a screwed up person? How come I make things up? How come I'm so sensitive? So I'm asking myself questions about what's wrong with me as opposed to interacting with things that are happening. That's the result of that. Okay, some years ago, uh, I want to say four or five. There was a doctor, Larry Nasser. He was the doctor for the United States women's gymnastics team, and
Yes.
there was a trial. He was tried and convicted of sexually assaulting many women.
Hundreds.
160 came forward. Most people don't come forward. So think of, oh, so what is that? That's an important story. That's a perpetrator. He should be convicted and etc. And then those women should be validated for their experiences. But the judge did an amazing thing. The judge said, anybody who wants to speak before his sentencing, it's called witness statements, we'll consider what you have to say. She said, I'm going to create a public forum. It's been public. Let's create a public forum for you if you want to come forward.
Yeah.
So then many women came forward and made statements. I listened to many of those, maybe all the ones I can get my hands on and read them. Those statements were very little bit about Larry Nasser. They were mostly about, I told my father, and he said doctors are not like that. I told the FBI, and they said we're not going to work on that. I told the police, and they said I'm sure that didn't happen. I told the prosecutors. And I told other people at the university. I told other people in the Olympics organization. The stories were all about not being believed, listened to, responded to, cared about, taken seriously. This is not dismissing his wounding. He's an
Right.
assaulter. We should stop him. We're
Right.
not trying to say, oh, that's okay. He's not a bad guy. He's a abusive man, hurt many, many women, sexual abuser.
Yeah.
But what lives inside of these people is the confusion. Who am I? What's going on? Why do I have this? How come I have cramps now? How come I'm suicidal? Why am I so depressed? Maybe I should go to a doctor and get help with my depression. That could be helpful because maybe that person would kill themselves if they didn't get medication. I'm not against somebody saying, I need to get help with my depression. But if the person's only thinking, I'm a depressed person, think about it. I'm a depressed person. What happened to the story? Where
Yeah.
did the violence go? Is it depression or is it a huge amount of violence that the person can't process? Calling it depression, you may not get to a healing. Understanding where that difficult, painful, low energy, knockdown feeling came from. Now I understand myself. Now compassion grows. Now I find other people who are victimized. I have community, solidarity. All those things that I'm talking about now, community, solidarity,
Yep.
understanding, processing trauma, all of those things are healing directions. Finding out I'm depressed could be helpful, but it's not going to lead me to the story and the gifts and the intelligence of my life.
Yeah, what's so interesting how, a couple of things as you were telling that story, I'm like, why
Yeah,
is this idea of gaslighting such an epidemic, right? For all of the people in power didn't believe them, whether it's like the parents or the coaches or the police. And then that gaslighting from from people that are supposed to help us turns into this internalized gaslighting that turns into then like physical or emotional manifestations and symptoms.
that's right.
Um, why is this gaslighting? Do you have a thought on why this gaslighting is such an epidemic from both
I,
externally and internally?
I have a few different thoughts. The first one is I don't really know for sure. Because I thought about that question a lot. I see there's things I do know and I haven't sort of informed thoughts and opinions about it, but I don't know for sure. But here's the things that I do know. The people who are empowered to do something about violence have a certain amount of power and are invested in that power. So when psychology in the West began with Sigmund Freud, that was 1899, 1902, 1905, somewhere in that period, 1899, I think is when he did his original research. So Freud did some research, worked with women, came up with the first diagnosis, psychological diagnosis in the West. And that diagnosis was hysteria, right? Women are hysterical, hysteria, right?
I'm
So,
laughing because,
yeah,
yes, of course.
yeah, that's the right hysteria, hysterectomy, it's of the uterus. So this was the diagnosis he came up with, and he wrote a paper. You can find the paper. I'm not adding an opinion. The paper said All of these people experience what we would now call incest. Now, they all, every one of them, they told stories, and he reported that just like that in the paper. That paper is public. You can find that he reported that, and he delivered that paper. Now, who did he deliver the paper to? Meaning he spoke to a group. He delivered it to white, male, Western medical doctors. I'm not trying to make a racial thing, although that should be there. I'm just not trying to say, oh, white people are the. I'm just that's who his audience was.
Power
Uh,
differential.
yeah. So now he tells those people that. What do you think their reaction is to him saying, by the way, there's a lot of women who grew up in homes where they were sexually violated as children. They're not going to be the most open to that.
No.
So, and they're invested in not having that happen because that's their life. That's my life. That's many people's lives. That's a huge percentage of people's lives. So they did not like that analysis. Freud went back to the drawing board and he came up with his next paper, which said children have fantasies, sexual fantasies about the opposite sex parent. What happened to the literal abuse? Children have this sexual fantasies, electric complexes, Oedipal complexes,
Mhm.
and what causes their difficulties is this fantasy life. So now think about the gaslighting. That's a fantasy life you have. Oh, right, that can get you into trouble. That's not a real experience that you had that you need to learn something about that have traumatized you, etc. So psychology has that built in Western psychology. There's psychology that's not called psychology in all
Yeah.
kinds of traditions, right? Aboriginal Australians,
Yeah.
dream life is psychological, etc. Bible has dream worlds in it. So but in terms of like how we look at things, so it's not shocking that certain cultures would look at the amount of violence that's happening and not have an easy time saying, oh my gosh, that's so difficult. And it's a little bit me.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
that's
hard. Yeah.
that's
What are you
what you
thinking?
you said, right? Like when you have that power and privilege, you're invested in your own power and privilege and you want to protect that.
Hmm.
And so because you have power and privilege, like people are going to believe them. They're just going to say like, well, that couldn't have possibly happened. You must just be having a fantasy.
That's right. It's very difficult. James Baldwin wrote this incredible letter to his nephew. I can't remember how old his nephew is. I want to say 14, but maybe he was 13 or 15. I think he wrote it in the 1950s. James Baldwin is a great African American writer, novelist, playwright, thinker, and he was telling his nephew, growing up in Harlem, what the world is going to be like for him. And he said, if people woke up about the conditions that you are suffering from as a young black youth in Harlem, if people woke up about that, it would be so dramatic. It would be as if the world turned upside down. It would be as if the sun rose in the west and set in the east. He said it would be, you'd have to understand what it would be to shift these big things is so radical, it disorients everybody. That's how big it is. It's not just like, oh, thanks for telling me. Now I get it. It's not so easy to shift a deeper embedded psychological truism
Yeah.
that is now holding me up, sustaining me, that I'm basing my goodness on, my life on, my sense of power on, who I think
Yeah.
I am, my esteem on. And then you're going to tell me it's not true about me? I'm not going to let go of that very easily.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is very a helpful conversation, especially for like my audience. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and healers and
Oh,
other
oh,
spiritual entrepreneurs. And so we are in, just like you, the industry of healing.
yeah.
And oftentimes, even with our best intentions, we can really hurt others if, unintentionally, if we don't recognize our privilege. And
Mhm.
one of the reasons that we ended up getting connected like this, and a core part of like my mentorship when I'm teaching other astrologers how to give
Mm,
consults, is
mm,
recognizing your privilege, recognizing your power.
yeah.
Because if you're really oblivious to that, just saying, well, I don't have any privilege, I'm just a, brown skinned middle-aged woman.
Mhm.
I'm not recognizing that I'm sitting on the table giving advice. I'm on the
Yeah.
side of the table that actually has that power differential. And so if I can remind you, when I reached out to you,
Yeah.
I was having a difficult way of finding a response to a client who I ultimately knew didn't fit with me. But everything that I said, even with my kind of compassion and my effort to be kind and understanding, she took everything as just a complete insult. And
Mm.
I went to you, I went to some of other trusted friends, like, how do I respond to her? How did I say anything out of bounds? How do I speak back with like out being, offensive? And you were so kind. Can I just read the response that you shared with me?
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember what I said, but
Yes.
happy to hear.
So you said it's always good to know what kind of clients are best for you. Some people are really focused on the relationship with the healer facilitator. That means that the content is less important, but their feelings and projections are more important. In that care, whether your reading is far or correct, the judgmental is less important than the dynamic between you two. That
Mm,
can't only be controlled by you. It's a function of their projections and what the therapists call transference. And yes, there is nothing you can say. You must open your mind to see that it's not about what you say, it's about the dynamic that lives between you and the person. There is an
mm,
offense between you. That's the truth. That doesn't mean you caused it, it just means that it exists. And that is more important to the person than the content of the reading. You can
mm,
decide not to see people like that, or you can decide to learn more about this kind of dynamic.
mm.
I thought that was super, super helpful. And then you offered me just kind of a suggestion on how to continue on the conversation.
Oh,
But in that power dynamic, right, there's just some people that you can't help because they're always just going to see you, maybe not as extreme as an enemy,
but maybe,
but maybe.
maybe.
And I
Yeah.
didn't have any control over that.
Yes. I teach therapists and coaches to work with people. And one of the things I say at some point in the teaching is if you get a client who says, I last person I worked with really wasn't helpful, that's fine. I had two prior therapists, coaches, whatever, and they really weren't helpful. I've worked with so many people. None of them have really been any good. Four, five, six, seven. Then you have to know you won't be either.
Yeah.
Because because it's not about your skill level or your capacity. It's about a dynamic that that person I'm gonna call it dreams of. I don't know if they create it by themselves, but it will get co-created. And that's the exact dynamic that they need to create because that's where they're working. And if you don't know that, then you're going to just think, what exactly what was happening? How do I do this? How do I do that? So I'm always telling my clients, if you get that, you have to know it's okay that you fail because that's what's about to happen. It's okay if the person says you're one more person who is no good. That's painful. I don't want to be told that.
Yeah.
But that is not just likely. It's almost definitely what will happen. It's part of their healing. Some
Yes.
people enter a relationship with a healer in order to walk away. Why
Mm.
would you do that? If I didn't get to walk away from people, how good it is to say, Leslie, hi, and then work with you for a couple months, say, I can leave, this is no good, I'm going off, right? And that's a practice. How long will a person practice that? As long as they need to.
Yeah.
There's no
Oh,
put down about that. Yeah.
that is so brilliant. You know, on that same vein, as an astrologer, I can't even begin to count how many clients have said, well, I went to this other astrologer and they told me this. And, even if they told them that like 20 years ago or like 10 years ago, it still sat with them because it was so terrifying
Mm, mm.
that part of when I'm guiding other astrologers or other healers, like to recognize that power and be careful what you say, because you don't want to fear monger, because that impression is going to stick with that person
Yeah.
for a very long time. And so
What happens when if you tell somebody, I don't I can't imagine what it would be if you told me something, David, your relationships are going to work great or they're not going to work. Let's say you said that. I don't know. I can't imagine you would say that
yeah,
to me.
no.
But let's say you said something to me and I had a big reaction to it. I was upset or scared or something like that. this is not a test. I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
what do you do if I kind of go, oh no, really? It's really going to be that bad? What do you do then?
Yeah. Well, gratefully, I'm not the type of astrologer that is ever going to put that kind of information out there because I don't believe I can predict that. I don't think that astrology is personally predictive because I see more astrology as prescriptive. Like, here is the energy at hand. And it looks like there's a lot of energy in your relationships, and you need to learn how to choose yourself over relationships. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't choose yourself over relationships and learn how to be interdependent in relationships, then your relationships are going to maybe cause you some challenges. But
And then let's say,
challenges,
let's slow
yeah.
down. And let's
Mhm.
say you said that to me, and I said, I've been trying to do that all a long time. I've been working on that for years. I don't know why am I hearing this message? I don't know. What would you do then?
Oh, I don't know what I would do. I'm so grateful that I don't have those kinds of clients.
Oh, okay, right. Well, that's good because you have to know the kind of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
if anybody would say that. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
yeah, but the types of clients that I do get a lot are clients that have suffered a lot of trauma.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's because personally for me, I love working with Chiron, and Chiron is one of those keys to trauma, but or that we all experience so much trauma. And this kind of our conversations happen to be safe places where people feel open enough to be able to express the abuse and things that they have gone through.
Yeah.
But for me, just similarly to you, I look at Chiron and I look at it as a gift of contribution because through our trauma, and you said this in your book too, if I can find that quote that I wrote down, it was something about great leaders, how great leaders rise from their traumatic experiences. There's
Mm-hmm.
a certain type of leader, and I truly believe that. And so when we look at our Chiron, I can look at it as like the greatest wounding that we experienced sometime in our childhood that shaped our perspective on the world, but also gave us the question that we spend our lifetime answering,
Beautiful.
right?
That's beautiful.
And the
Yeah, I
work
like that you
that,
say that. It's the question we spend our lifetime answering, and we don't. It's not about getting the answer. It's the answering process. That's a developmental process, an emerging process. It doesn't have to be an end. It could be the next generation. It could be many generations that
oh
will
yeah,
continue with certain questions.
yeah,
Certain questions have been around for thousands of years. They unfold over
yeah.
time. What are you thinking? Hmm.
Well, like in Chiron, his mythic story, he never heals his chironic wound, that wound in his left leg that like this painful gash. He's half demigod, so he can't die from this wound. He just suffers from this wound. And
Mm,
he learns all of these healing modalities looking to try to heal his own wound. He can't, but he can heal others from his lived experience, from
beautiful.
all of the skills that he picked up. And so this is a lifelong question because you can't heal your Chiron wound,
Right. Beautiful.
but it becomes this gift of contribution. Your Chiron in Aquarius opposite your moon, which represents your family and your mother, there's a conflict there. That's why when we were talking about the pain from your family really came from your mother and her unpredictableness and her just kind of like, why aren't you supporting me?
Mhm.
And that has led you on your path of how can I nurture myself? How can I feel safety? How can I feel safe of being me? How can I feel safe in my family? Is it safe to belong? Is it safe to be nurtured?
Interesting. I don't usually think of it that way. Um, I I have an implicit assumption that life is not safe, so I don't.
Mhm.
I like it when I have moments of safety, but even in my inner life is not safe.
Yeah,
So I have some level. I'm not saying that's right for other people, by the way.
yeah,
People are different, but I have some level of life is this. The life project is not a safe one. Um, so I live in that situation. But some
yeah,
moments I feel more safe and I'm really glad, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a different way or similar to what you're saying.
Well, I think it's similar to what I'm saying because there's this conflict there. Like you don't feel safe. You're looking for that safety. And so by you writing about shame, by you writing about all the things that you do in terms of interpersonal relationships, it's really you trying to answer that story of like, Why didn't my primary relationship as I was a child
Hmm.
really nurture and make me feel safe?
Interesting. And then the question you've been bringing up, and what kind of medicine or powers or gifts flow out of the fact that that happened? That
Exactly.
makes sense.
And that
Like
is our
what
gift
happened
of
in the past and why did
contribution.
that happen and how did that affect me? And then given that story, what do I make out of that?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I like that second part because in the conventional healing idea, it says what caused it and how do we deal with it so that you don't have those troubles. But I think then it leaves out what you're describing. I don't know the astrological ideas, but what you're describing is the wounded healer. But then what medicine grows out of that? How do you treat the world? How do you treat a child or a tree or the coral reefs or whatever, or the Palestinians, or how do you treat a group? How do you treat the world given that wound? Anyway, I just wanted to add that I like that because then otherwise the shame enters with what's wrong. Let's figure that out. Figure out what's wrong. A little bit on that is good. People to know their stories, at least some of what that story is about. But what you do with it, phew, that's huge.
What you do with it. And there you did write about this in your in chapter 10, Witnessing Trauma, about the gifted people rose out of the depths of trauma, that the
Yeah,
greatest and most leaders rose out of social marginalization.
yeah.
And and to me, as we're moving in this world, like just kind of like I live in the United States in San Francisco, and just like, you
Mhm.
know, every single headline over the last 10 days has been another disaster, another blow to our rights. And you know, for those of us who are of more like underrepresented identities, we don't feel that we have anything to contribute, but we have so much to contribute because we have the compassion and the empathy of living through so much of this like social shame.
Yeah, that's huge. Inside the individual, the most healing aspects of an individual are hidden in the shadow. So that means if I can get a little bit of healing in my life without that, but then if I want to get a deeper healing, I have to get to know what I don't know about myself and be informed by that. That's in the individual. In the culture, it's the same way. Those parts that live in the shadow of the culture, that means marginalized
Mm-hmm.
folks, have the deepest information about the healing of the group, of the collective, of the nation. So, and then we even follow that in the United States. The vision. Let's say there was a genuine vision. Not that's maybe that should be called into question of a democracy of a we the people. And then how does that democracy develop and grow into something? Mostly African Americans is the biggest way because
Yeah.
the challenge says you say that, but here's the lack of truth of that. So then that idea has to get educated off of that conflict. And then women come forward, etc. Things happen that challenge it, that say you have to wake up. We can argue then about, well, we should be critical about how well that's the country is doing on that. But that always happens from the shadow, inside the individual, inside the family. The person who has the most difficult time with the family is in the inherent leader. I'm not saying they can lead, everybody follow me, but they're disturbing the family status quo,
Mm-hmm.
and that therefore that person has the medicine for that particular thing. The person who's more messed up, who's throwing dishes,
Yeah.
who's quiet when everybody else is noisy, who's not doing well, whatever that thing is. And that happens in communities, and that happens in nations, and it happens in the globe. Who are those people who are the most marginalized? They have the deepest insights about the ills of the way the stream, the main stream, meaning the biggest flow of those places that are dominated, those people who are suffering most from that won't have that information.
Yeah, they have to work harder and smarter and all those things to just kind of get to the same level as
Yeah.
everybody else. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Could
You
you?
have a lot of experience of your own. That's really important. You're talking about that from your own culture, from your own skin and color and gender. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. You correct me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It like absolutely. I want people to know that their lived experience is their expertise, right?
Hmm.
Society so
Beautiful.
far has been telling us that, you know, you need all of these degrees and certifications. And like, there's nothing wrong with getting degrees. I have a master's degree myself, but the true power comes from your tenacity. Like, if you've been caretaking and going to school and having a job at the same time, your true tenacity comes from, you know, all of the healing work that you've done to overcome some kind of trauma.
Mhm.
your
Beautiful.
your greatness comes from this lived experience. And how can we start to self-validate by this sense of unshaming, like taking apart the social stigmas and shame, and self-validate and see our own
Yeah.
lived experience as our expertise?
You have a message. You're a messenger. I'm calling that's my word. I know it. You're a messenger. You have a message, then you want to broadcast that message.
Yes,
That's great.
absolutely. I
That's the
mean,
message. Yeah, go ahead.
you have a message too.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So I love, not to turn that back around, but I would love to hear more about your ideas on this, on social marginalization and the social constructs that create shaming, because a lot of my listeners are people of color and women,
Mhm.
and we're always facing this kind of social
Yeah.
shame.
When a person is assaulted, and that could be a physical assault, right? Like I hit somebody, that's an assault. My father's fists were an assaultive. But there are many kinds of assaults. Depriving you of a job or of medical care would be a kind of an assault. Criticizing you in a way, humiliating you, putting you down would be a kind of an assault, right? Telling you
Yeah.
you're a terrible person. Objectifying you would be a kind of an assault, right? Looking at you as a less worthy human being is a kind of an assault. It's an energy that comes out that could injure. So that happens, and if you're living in a marginalized group, then in a marginalized world, a world that marginalizes your identity, then there's going to be a regular flow of those assaults. Some of them are going to be obvious, right? And some of those are going to be less obvious. People would call that a microaggression. I didn't say anything. I just know, whatever. So those assaults could be big. I think these kind of people are bad. At least it's out there, right? It's easier to deal with in a way,
Yeah.
right? And then there are some things that are going to be micro, more subtle seeming. Maybe not to you. You may be like, what do you mean? It's obvious, but other people go, what do you mean, right? So that happens. There's a flow of that. Those don't cause shame. Those are assaults. Those can hurt. Those can injure. Those can make you feel really bad about yourself. What causes shame, connecting now to my own story, is a culture around those wounds that say, I don't think that's happening. I don't think people would do that. We're over that. That's not true. No one would treat you that way. I didn't see it that way. Why do you take things that way? Just the way my mother treated my wound. So if
Yeah.
a whole culture then denies, gaslights that assault, then if you're vulnerable, you're going to think, maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I am really screwed up. Maybe this is true. Maybe I am too angry. Maybe I am too this way. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I may be making things up. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? So instead of saying I know what's going on, I'm a woman of color. I enter the world. People look at me in certain ways and treat me as less worthy, less intelligent, less
Mhm.
something. I know what that's like. I'm not confused about that. That then you're protected from shame. It still hurts. If I put you down, it's still going to hurt, but you're not going to walk away thinking, what's wrong with me? You're just going to walk away thinking, that really sucked. That David really hurt me. He's a hurtful person. That's
Yeah.
not shame. An assault. But if you don't know that, then you would kind of go, well, David would, he seems like a good guy. He would never have done that. I feel terrible. I feel awful, but he would never have done that. So that denial and dismissal of what's happening, now you're doubting your own experience. So that happens all the time. It- so that's the outer scene. David says something to you, and then when you go to a friend, I know David, he's a great guy. He never would do that. And you're kind of going, well, maybe he wouldn't. So now that's an outer scene. But
Yeah.
now let's say you internalize certain ideas, as everybody does. I'm a woman. I'm a brown woman. I probably shouldn't do this. I better be quiet. I better manage my anger because people will look at me as a hostile woman of color. I better not take up too much space as a woman. Let's say those things are going on inside. This is how I should look. This is what beautiful is. This is what I shouldn't get old. I should. If you have all those ideas in your head, how
Mhm.
could you not? Everybody does.
I have all those ideas in my
Yeah.
head right now.
Everybody does. They're a constant flow. So now no one's saying that to you. I'm not saying you should look this way. Why did you dress that? But you have it in your head. You look in the mirror, you're kind of, oh my, right? Oh my gosh, get on the scale. Oh, I got so that's happening all the time. So now the assault is not happening from David saying something nasty to you. It's happening, it's already in you, and it's being said all the time
Mm.
inside of you. But if there's no witness of that, no one says, wait a second, oh, that's violent. You're getting beat up inside. If that somebody doesn't notice that, talk to you about internalized depression, what it's like, internalized sexism, internalized racism. If no one educates you about that, you won't know that's happening. And you'll just think, how come my esteem is low? How come I'm upset? How come I fly off the handle sometimes? How come I have no energy? And listen to all those questions. Why am I upset? Why am I on energy? Why am I angry? Those are all questions of what's wrong with me. And notice that all of those analyses are missing something. I'm getting the shit beat out of me inside from things I've taken in.
Yeah.
The real diagnosis is internalized oppression that's not being noticed.
Unwitnessed, internalized
Yeah,
oppression.
that's right. And that's super common. We know that it's super common because people don't talk enough about what's happening on the inside. We should talk about what's happening on the outside also. There's no
Yep.
doubt about that. But some people know about that and speak about that. This is what we need to do. This is the activism we need to do. When Donald Trump says certain things, we should challenge that. That's great. We need more of that, clearly. And there are really great people doing that work.
Yeah.
Now, what's living inside of me? 97% of women have violent voices about their bodies every single day inside their heads.
Really
97% violent, not like that could be different, meaning you're not lovable, you're this, you're not
to
attractive.
this,
No
to
one's gonna be
that.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like really awful things. How come that's not being talked about? And if that's happening all the time, that's a huge thing. So now you have a sexist voice.
Mhm,
You're
mhm.
getting older, you're getting wrinkled, you got flabby, this part of you is sagging, this part of you is not perky, all those kind of things, right? Men have those things also, right? But if you look at it in a gendered way, if a woman has all that, she's going to walk around feeling less beautiful and not knowing why. And then that woman thinks it's really true. I'm not attractive. She's not thinking I've learned to believe I'm not attractive because people told me that so much. She believes it.
Yeah.
Follow the difference. One would be if I said you're unattractive, that person said that really hurts, but I don't believe you. But it's still I don't like being talked to. But if but so there's no shame in that example. I don't
Yeah.
know, like that you tell me that if that's very painful for you to say that to me, David. But if you believe it, nothing inside is saying, whoa, that's violent, that's gross, and that's going on inside. That's just one example about the physical beauty thing. And then some people would say, okay, so, but that's pretty painful that women don't think they're beautiful. But how bad is that? If you don't think you're beautiful, you won't speak up as much. If you don't think you're beautiful, it'll be harder to read a book because you can't focus because you don't feel good. If you don't think you're beautiful, you're more likely to enter an abusive relationship because I'm not worth so much. So I can go on and on. This is not a small thing. It's enormous impact. And that's just one thing. If you don't think, we could also talk about intelligence. Something says I'm not as smart. So I'm just focusing on the beauty thing as one
Yeah.
possible thing and one category, gender and beauty, right?
Yeah.
Or
Well, because
gender and
that's how like
intelligence.
women are judged for their value. And so that's very much internalized, as very much a belief system that if you don't believe that you're beautiful, then you don't have value to contribute into the world.
Yes, it's incredible. I once worked with a woman. I can tell this story. It's in my third book. I think I wrote about it also in the recent book, in Unshaming Way. Uh, African American woman, and um, and we got into a really deep conversation. And I said, um, um, we were talking about body and body image, and she said to me, "Can I tell you a secret? Sometimes I wish I were like white and pretty and thin." I was like, oh, that I can't imagine that. Already, I was like, oh, that voice is in her head. She knew it. She knew that that was an
Yeah.
internalized sexist and racist idea, but she still has it in there. Like,
Yeah.
right? She's like, I wish I was like that. And I said, what would be so good about that? And she said, people would open doors for me.
Mm.
Literal doors? Oh, except and doors makes me cry. And
Yeah.
doors to opportunity, doors to
To
being listened to, doors to being respected. Whoa. And then I would probably not be so hurt. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, people don't hurt beautiful things.
Yeah, I remember that story.
An incredible meaning. If people saw me as beautiful, still people do hurt beautiful things. They're more likely to try to treat me tenderly, right? If
Yeah.
they don't see me as beautiful, well, I can treat you roughly. Listen to how powerful that implication is. Phew. Yeah, she
Yeah.
doesn't genuinely wish she was white and thin and pretty, but she was saying something to me about her experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And the symbolism and the meaning that you were able to reflect back and connect the dots with her on that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so beautiful. I wanted, I know we're kind of running out of time. I want to respect your time. I want to talk about two little things
Two
before.
little things. Let's talk
Um,
about two little things.
Two little things. I want to come back to your astrology because I know that you don't know exactly your birth time and you kind of gave me an approximation, but
Yeah.
there's two like big things that shift in those times. And I think even if
Oh,
we don't know the exact time, I can kind of like narrow down something.
what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay, ask me some
So,
questions.
this is about your moon sign, and your moon sign is another part of our charts that I really love looking at because it does tell a lot about what we need to feel safe, what we need to feel heard, what we need to feel emotionally secure.
Oh,
And I'm curious, when you were young, were you often told that you were too sensitive or too loud and wanting to take up all of the attention?
I don't. Well, I wasn't told I was too loud because I wasn't. I was really quiet actually. I thought I was shy, but I wasn't. I was just frightened.
Yeah.
And this thing, I walked around thinking I'm really shy. I'm really shy. It wasn't true. I was just really scared. That's a very different diagnosis. Um, say two cent. I don't think people use that term. Um, but so given that they didn't use that term, but I think people would have said I shouldn't be affected by things.
Yeah.
If that would be the same kind of meaning.
Would you say like when you are, receiving love from, your wife or another loved one, there's this idea of nurturing, feeling nurtured or feeling visible and seen?
That's interesting. I think for some of I'm 69 years old. For some of my life, being seen was more important. Um, but I think more in the last years, um, I'm more open to the to nurturance. My
Yeah.
wife was a really one of the kindest hearted people I've ever known. So, um,
I have a suspicion just looking at your chart. You're actually a Cancer moon. So, Cancer moons are very intuitive, they're very nurturing, they make people feel open and soft and safe.
mm,
And I also think that you're a Sagittarius rising, meaning that you lead by connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture for someone so that they can like then make their own beliefs and decisions.
interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. I never
Yeah.
knew that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have, of course, all of your Libra energy, which really makes you relational. And the sun is right at the top of the sky. And so, of course, you have a lot of influence. You love reciprocity, mutuality, mutual respect, and building bridges.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. So,
Now you're telling me you could have told me 30 years ago. No, I'm just a
right.
joke. That's a
Well,
joke.
I love connecting the dots too, personally, like just looking at how your sun, moon, and rising impact what you do, looking at Chiron. And so, for my clients who love astrology and like are looking at how to become their best type of leader by
Uh-huh.
attuning to their stars instead of just guessing, I kind of do in a very similar way through astrology with what you do so much more brilliantly.
Oh, thank you.
The last tiny thing is that as we close up our conversations, my listeners are mostly women, mostly leaders,
Mm,
astrology lovers, spiritual lovers. Do you have any like last like guidance or like pearl of wisdom that you'd like to leave us from the unshaming way?
mm, let's think about that. I'm looking outside and I'm seeing today is very wet in Southern California. It's not always like that, which is good because it's makes it the fires um, less likely to expand. So I guess that makes me think about the fires and the water and what to do with the fire that's in you. or the people listening, what do you do with that fire? How do you calm it? And do you sometimes douse it when it needs to burn? That's what comes up to me when I'm just dreaming about what you're saying. What do I do with my fire? Don't be too quick to douse it, to suppress it, because the world needs some things to be burned down. Not literally, don't hurt
Right.
precious animals and plants and people. You know what I mean by burn down? I mean belief systems
Yeah.
that need to be toppled and need some fire. And then there's sometimes that need for that moisture that's in there. So anyway, that's what the weather is telling me to talk about those things. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm up in Northern California. You can see the weather behind me. So it's
Oh, yeah, right.
similar. Very. So yeah, I love that vision for us, that message of, like go into the flames, don't run away from them. Really
Yeah.
note like what is fueling your anger, and that shows you the boundaries and the advocacy that you need to step into.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Nice to
beautiful.
hang out with you,
Thank
Leslie.
you so much, David. So, quickly, how can people get in touch with you? Do you have ways to work with you besides this amazing book?
Mhm. Um, People can follow me on Instagram under David Bedrick. My last name is Bedrick, like bedrock with an I, David Bedrick. I don't do one-on-one work, but I have about 100 trained students now who do unshaming work. So if people want a referral, um, I worked with people for 35 years, and then that was the end of that. But I teach a lot of different classes, so teaching is my love and my passion. So coming to classes of mine would be a way of, they wanted to learn directly from me, that would be the way to do that.
Yeah, I want to sign up for your unshaming class, definitely.
Okay. There's going to be one coming up, I think in March. I haven't done it in 2 years, but yeah.
Oh, perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll head on over to your website and sign up right now.
Hey, it's not listed yet. It will be soon, the next couple of weeks. So,
Okay. I'll
okay.
I'll make sure I get on your email list. So,
Yeah, get on the email list.
well,
Mm.
thank you so much again for your time and your brilliance. And everybody, I really highly recommend The Unshaming Way. So
Mm.
grab your copy today. All
Thank
right.
you, Leslie.
Thank you, David. Bye for now.
Bye.
As a human design projector, my energy shines more brightly because of people like you who share my work. If you enjoy this podcast and want to help build a movement of innovative astrology and leadership and spark the intuitive revolution, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, or better yet, share this podcast with your change-making besties. We will all shine brighter together as we create the future we want to see.